Willow Buds, The Tale of Toad and Badger. Dear reader, I found this really old suitcase in my grandma's attic that belonged to my great-great-uncle Ratty. Inside I found a set of diaries and a little key. The diaries were filled with funny stories about Uncle Ratty when he was young and just getting to know his pals Badger, Mole, and Toad, who you might know from The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, I guess. The book describes their adventures as grown-ups, but nobody ever knew how they became friends. I asked my friend Mary Jane to retell the stories from Uncle Ratty's diaries. She even called them Willow Buds in honor of my name. Here's the key to each of the books. I hope you enjoy them. Your friend Rosebud. January 28th, 1922. Dear Diary, Badger just told me the most amusing story about the first time he met our dear friend Toady. I was in stitches. Badger and Toad are just like brothers. They love each other, but they don't always get along. I must write it all down before I forget anything. Very truly yours, Ratty. Born on a fine summer day in 1888, Archibald Toad III was considered the most handsome baby in the nursery, perhaps even the most handsome baby of all time, by his parents, of course. They're all cute, but I prefer the rat. Baby Ratty. Before long, he became known as Toady, for it was much easier to say Toady, don't touch that, or Toady, put that down, than Archibald Toad III. Don't throw your spinach. Her face is priceless. Like, oh no, that mess. As Toady grew, Mr. and Mrs. Toad decided to hire a nanny to look after him. The sour-faced Mrs. Nag lasted 1 week. Mrs. Hogg, who snored and drooled when she napped, lasted only 1 day. And Miss Wanda Weasel liked shiny things that didn't belong to her. She lasted exactly 1 hour. It's like, Miss, are you going to take that? I can see I'm beginning to like this story already. Mrs. Toad finally called upon Mrs. B, a wonderful nanny who agreed to travel from the faraway wild wood to Toad Hall as long as she could bring along a special someone. And that special someone was her son, Badger. Toady was horrified. I'm the only special someone at Toad Hall, he grumbled. After proper introductions, Toady decided to at least try to be nice. After all, he never had a real friend before. He asked Badger, "Would you like to climb my apple tree?" "Yes," Badger answered, as they raced across the grounds. Toady scrambled up the tree. and then shook it, sending apples tumbling down onto Badger. Rubbing his sore head, Badger picked up the enormous red apple that had struck him. "You took the one I wanted," Toady declared, and stomped back to the house. Badger followed, crunching his apple loudly. As Mrs. B prepared lettuce and peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, Toady and Badger sat down to paint. "These are mine and those are yours," announced Toady, pulling most of the paint cups to his side of the table. As Badger finished his painting, he remarked, "These are the perfect colors for painting a badger." Toady stuck out his tongue. After lunch, the boys went to play in Toady's room. "You might break my toys," Toady told Badger, "so you'd better just play with your old stuffed dolly." "It's not just a stuffed dolly, it's Andy," said Badger. "My mom made him and he's the best toy in the world." By nap time, Badger and Toady were not speaking to each other. After Mrs. B tucked the boys in, Toady crept across the room and lifted Andy from Badger's side. With a great swoosh, Toady swung Andy high up into a bookshelf. One of Andy's legs could still be seen, so Toady reached for it. He tugged, but it didn't budge. He tugged harder. He tugged very hard, and there was a terrible rip. "Oh no," groaned Toady, feeling sick. He pulled the two sides of Andy toward him, and then stuffed the toy under the bookshelf. "Where's Andy?" Badger cried when he awoke, searching high and low for his beloved toy. Then he reached under the bookshelf. Toady could see Badger's shoulders quivering. Yes. No one said a word. "I didn't mean it," wailed Toady. "I was only trying to hide Andy because I was mad at you." "Why? What did I do?" asked Badger. "It's just that I've never had to share Toad Hall until now," Toady answered quietly. "I'm sorry." "Are you really sorry or just saying it?" Badger asked. "I'm really sorry," answered Toady as he tenderly touched Andy's ear. "Wait, I have an idea. Let's sew him back together." Toady raced out the door to get the sewing basket. They tried to sew, but Toady poked himself twice with the needle, and Badger stitched his shirt to the bedspread. Toady and Badger carefully carried Andy to Mrs. B. She showed the boys how to thread the needle, where to sew the seam, and when to tie the knot. Together they made Andy whole again. When they finished, Mrs. B gave them chamomile tea and fresh baked biscuits with honey. With his mouth full and tea dripping down his chin, Toady asked hopefully, "Will you be back tomorrow, Mrs. B?" And Badger too. "I'll be back every day, Toady," Mrs. B answered gently, "and Badger too." January 29th, 1922. Dear Diary, Mrs. B was Toady's nanny until he was grown. From the first day they met, Toady and Badger were like two peas in a pod. Sometimes they disagreed, but mostly they played games, painted pictures, ate biscuits, and did whatever best buds do. Yours, Ratty.